In our world lead, Secretary of State Marco Rubio started an international guessing game this morning by saying this about the Trump administration's attempts to get a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine.
We need to figure out here now in a matter of days whether this is doable in the short term. Because if it's not, then I think we're just going to move on.
With us now is former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. Ambassador Taylor, good to see you. What do you think will happen if the U.S. ultimately decides we can't do this and they move on, as Secretary Rubio says?
The war won't move on. The war will continue. Ukrainians will continue to fight. The Russians will continue to push on Ukraine. If the Ukrainians have the support from the United States, even if we've moved on, if we continue to provide the support, that could allow them to continue to hold back. Europeans are also stepping up, and so this will not stop the war.
Can Ukraine continue to fight the war if they have the support of the Europeans, which seems relatively ironclad, but not the United States?
They can, and they will. It turns out that wars change, as you've been reporting, and it turns out 40% of the weapons used by Ukrainians at this time is 40% produced in Ukraine.
Mm.
The changes also on drones artillery. It used to be artillery was the big killer on both sides, actually, and now it's drones. And the Ukrainians make a lot of drones, so they can provide that. And in terms of will, you know that story.
Yeah. We all remember candidate Trump repeatedly boasted on the campaign trail that he would end the war in Ukraine in the first 24 hours of taking office. Here's what he said this afternoon.
My whole life has been one big negotiation, and I know when people are playing us, and I know when they're not, and I have to see an enthusiasm to want to end it. And I think I see that enthusiasm. I think I see it from both sides.
Do you think Russia's
But you're
playing?
going to know soon.
Do you think Russia's playing you?
No, nobody's playing me. I'm trying to help.
What do you think? Do you think Russia's playing? Because we had Brett McGurk here and talked about the negotiations in Saudi Arabia, and Zelensky, this is after that horrible meeting in the Oval Office, Zelensky agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. Russia hasn't honored even a day of that.
You're exactly right, Jake. President Trump and President Zelensky agreed on that 30-day ceasefire, and they went to President Putin, and Putin said no. Putin is the problem. He is stalling it out. He is dragging it out so that he can take grinding a little bit more territory every day.
So the Wall Street Journal is reporting that a framework for a peace deal has been presented to all sides. Secretary Rubio wouldn't go into detail, but one sticking point appears to be the security guarantees that Ukraine wants in case of a ceasefire, and whether the U.S. would be ready to back up any possible European security force, so like the French and the Germans being invited to have some bases in Ukraine. Rubio says security guarantees are not an illegitimate desire. What do you think?
I think it's a very strong desire. In fact, it's a requirement for the Ukrainians that they have some reason to believe that if they sign a ceasefire, that the Russians won't come back. The Russians won't violate it, which they have. You remember in the Minsk group times, the Minsk negotiations, the Russians violated those ceasefires 17 times.
I'm old enough to remember when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in a deal with the United States and the, I think, Soviet Union, in which they said, we'll never invade you as long as you give up these nuclear weapons.
You're exactly right. It was actually the Russians.
It was Russians,
actually the
okay.
Russians. That's exactly right. And the Russians, and the Americans, and the Brits said, if you give up these weapons, your security is guaranteed. And of course, it wasn't.
Yeah. There are indications that the U.S. and Ukraine are close to a deal on mineral rights. This is very important to the United States, to Trump. Ukraine giving the U.S. access to its mineral wealth as payback for all the billions of dollars of assistance the U.S. has given. Would that be a big achievement?
It would be an achievement, and it would get Americans into Ukraine and working, developing those resources. That's a good thing. The United States would like to say that that's part of a security guarantee. The Ukrainians are not convinced that that's going to be the security guarantee. But if both the United States and Ukraine can develop those resources over time, this is not something that's going to happen quickly, then that's good for both sides.
All right, Ambassador Bill Taylor, always good to have you here. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your expertise. The Vice